Well, welcome to your last session. My name is John Kolb. I'm an attorney from St. Cloud, Minnesota. I'm going to be moderating this session. The session's titled Tile Drainage and Wetland Regulation. And we have a very diverse panel here. We've got a couple of producers, a couple of agency folks, and I'm going to start by just asking, and we'll start from right to left as you're seated there. So Lee, you'll be going first. Just going to ask the panelists to introduce themselves, talk a little bit, if they're an agency folks, about what programs they're involved in and how those touch on ag drainage. And then if you're a producer, if you could talk about where you produce, what your crops are, and just a little bit about where you're coming from, and then we'll have some introductory questions to get the discussion started. So Lee, if you could start us out, that'd be great.
Sure. Thank you all for being here and participating in this panel discussion. Lee Ganske, I work for Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. I work right here in Mankato. I oversee a statewide river and stream monitoring program. We have 200 river and stream monitoring stations statewide where we're looking at stream flow and water quality. So I tend to, I suppose because of that, I tend to come at the issues that we're talking about today from a fairly large scale. So some of our smallest stations are draining areas of tens to hundreds of thousands of acres. So scale is something that I've heard mentioned lots of times today, and it may continue to come up in terms of the challenges it presents in terms of working on these issues and understanding impacts at different scales. So the first thing I should say is that our agency, Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, has very little regulatory or permitting authority in the area of tiling or wetland related activities. There are a few exceptions to that, projects where the Corps of Engineers, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers are involved. We have some certification authority there, but and there are a few other small exceptions, but largely we are not on the regulatory or the permitting side of these issues. Where we are involved is through our role in watershed restoration and protection projects that occur at scales ranging from like an individual lake all the way up to the upper Mississippi Basin, the Minnesota River Basin. And it seems that for almost virtually all of those projects, many or virtually all of those projects, the theme that has been developing now for years is that in order to make any headway on water quality protection and improvement, we have to address flow and moderating flow. The way it gets expressed as storing water, and of course we've heard about different ways that can be accomplished, from the sort of the engineering approaches to soil health practices. So, and I guess I'll just end by saying that the challenge I think that we see as an agency is that the sorts of practices that are being employed and that we've heard about today just aren't keeping pace with the ongoing drainage activities that are occurring, and then this all may be further exacerbated by some of the climate scenarios, climate change scenarios that we hear about from our state climatology office. So that's sort of in summary where, I think how our agency looks at these issues and where we come at it in sort of a broad sense.
I'm Pat Duncanson from just a few miles south of here, 20 miles south of here in southern Blue Earth County. I'm a corn and soybean and pork producer, and I also can't forget our minor crops, which are minor meaning minor from an income standpoint, cover crops, which we have been dabbling with for a few years. And I also have probably the largest planting of kernza, or perennial wheatgrass. I think I have 0.8 of an acre that is an experimental strip that I'm working with the university on. No judgment passed on that yet, by the way, so skip those questions. Other than I was able to get it to turn green again this spring, so that's success, I guess. But we farm a few thousand acres of corn, soybeans, and we also raise quite a few pigs. I was one of the petitioning landowners for County Ditch 57, which seems like a long time ago, and it probably was only maybe 10 years ago, but it took a long time to get that CD 57 finally to the construction phase. Since then, we've done a pretty active job of monitoring, and which incorporates storage and incorporates, we were extremely fortunate to have some cooperative landowners that could come together. So if I covered everything, John, we needed to?
That's perfect, Pat. Thanks.
Herman Bartsch. I'm from Good Thunder, Minnesota, and I work out of the MDA office here in North Mankato, and I serve South Central Minnesota, implementing the Ag Water Quality Certification Program. So we work with farmers in the area, and basically what we're doing is whole farm planning for water quality. So we're really doing an assessment of the best management practices that are used on the farm for water quality, and trying to look for opportunities to implement more, and trying to make the water quality and the agriculture, production agriculture fit together. So Lee was talking about the scale. We're really at the field scale, you know, boots on the ground. We're out there with the farmer, trying to listen to what their concerns are and help them address their issues on the farm. So we have an online assessment tool that we use to evaluate that. And then if they're sufficiently meeting the water quality concerns on their farm, then they can get this 10-year certification, which basically deems them to be in compliance with any new water quality regulations that come into play. So that's what I'm doing.
Perfect. And then
Peter Anthony. We farm 20 miles north of Mankato with my parents, my wife, and 2 sons. A few thousand acres of corn and soybeans, some small grains, raise hogs, and have beef feedlot as well. Pat and his brother inspired us to start installing our own drain tile 20 years ago, as they'd been doing for many years. So we do drainage tile installation on a small scale as well.
Next comments, mostly, Pat, you and Peter, just to think about these things for a little bit, because you encounter these on a more daily basis. Given the title of the panel discussion, we're talking about wetland rules and tiling, and so you'd know most of those programs that you encounter. The USDA has a program to protect wetlands that were on the landscape as of December 23rd, 1985. Swamp Buster, you're familiar with that. You've got to navigate that. The state's got a Wetland Conservation Act that prevents you from filling or draining wetlands without replacement under most circumstances. You've got to navigate that. You may have local rules at the county level, watershed level, the Corps of Engineers under the Clean Water Act. You can't discharge dredge or fill material into wetlands without a permit from them. You know, and there's more programs obviously as well. And then based on the tenor of today's seminar, you have all these other issues that you're facing that obviously Herman and Lee deal with on a more regular basis, having to do with water quantity and quality, and so you're obviously looking at those things as well. But I guess I'll start, Peter, with you. You know, of those programs and of all those things you need to navigate, what keeps you awake at night when you're thinking about managing soil moisture and working on making your property more efficient from a drainage aspect?
Well, fortunately, my wife is the only one that keeps me awake at night. And I'm, you know, one of the nice things about agriculture is that, you know, pretty quickly you realize that if you spend a lot of time worrying about things, it's not really for you, because there's so much that you could worry about and it's really beyond your control. So I don't have to worry about staying up too much at night. But, you know, that said, I think one of the great strengths of the USD NRCS program is that despite some, you know, pretty minor changes since 1985, it's been a really consistent law, really consistent regulatory structure. And there is a often underappreciated benefit to having that consistency. And when you go into the NRC office, you know what to expect. You have a pretty good idea what you'll be able to do and what you won't be able to do starting out. And there are people that have been working with the same rules for multiple decades. And you know, there's just a lot of benefit to having that sort of consistency in a wetland law. So I think I got off the track of your question a little bit, but...
No, I think that's a great answer, and we're going to talk about a little bit about consistency and how you can anticipate. And I think I'm going to defer to Herman on that in just a moment, but I want to give Pat a chance to, if he's had a chance to think about it, maybe comment on the same question, you know, of all of those programs. What's your experience been? Maybe one's been more difficult than the other. Maybe one has some better qualities than another.
Sure. Well, a certain wrinkle in that question only becomes difficult to an individual farmer until he has that specific problem. So if all of my issues have been with NRCS or with a different agency or with a different wrinkle in that question, that's where I would have focused you know, most of my answers. I'm fortunate in that most of the time, I'm going to echo Peter's comments about the consistency that, and in the area of the county where we farm, there was existing infrastructure in almost every field and every acre that we farm. So we were very, very high percentage of prior converted. And we were fortunate in that we were in that category and we didn't have to fight a lot of those rules, or we put the effort in very early on. Where there hasn't been consistency is sometimes in turnover in staff and in people and in interpretation. And that's frustrating to a farmer because he goes in and gets an answer from somebody that thinks is going to stand forever, and then there's a turnover in staff or a change in people, and the underlying rules didn't change, but the interpretation. And I'm not pointing fingers and blaming, and maybe the first answer was wrong and the second one was right, or maybe there's room for interpretation two different ways and they're both equally right or wrong. So that becomes a question. I'd also like to point out that beyond the individual problems that we've got in our field, increasingly we're spending more time in 10, 15, 20 years ago, we didn't even think as farmers about, well, what happens as we discharge water? Where does it go? Most of the time, after it left our farm, we didn't care, or we didn't even think of that. Well, now increasingly, we have to be concerned about, well, what happens downstream effects? And maybe there has been no change in law or no change in written policy, but there certainly has been a change in public perception. And we have to be much more active in thinking about what happens what happens with downstream impacts.
Herman, I'd like to direct the next question to you. And again, both of the producers here talked about predictability, and I know our first speaker today talked about the Ag Water Quality Certification Program, and at a minimum it gives a producer 10 years of breathing space. But could you talk a little bit about what is involved in getting a water quality certification and how drainage factors into the considerations for whether a producer can get certified or not?
Yeah, one thing I would start by saying is that so far a lot of the farmers that have participated in the program, their primary reasoning for doing it is to demonstrate their water quality ethic. You know, they're not, you know, as Peter said, they're not losing sleep at night wondering what regulation is going to come down the pipe. I think that has played some role in getting some people to participate, but overall, that has not been the driving force. As far as the assessment and getting certified, the assessment involves several different things. Number one, we look at just the inherent properties of the field, like your soil texture and slope. We look at your nutrient management, right source, right place, right timing. We look at tillage management, pest management. You mentioned the tiling. We want to know if there's tile in the field, which usually around here there is. There are very few fields that don't have tile. And then if there is tile, are there open tile intakes? That's something that a lot of people have been working on, either converting those to rock intakes or just getting rid of them altogether because they don't want to farm around them. And that's something that's kind of a priority for the program too, is to at least treat those to prevent sediment from going down there. Also, when we're looking at tile, I think probably the number one practice for treating the tile water is nutrient management. When we're looking at nutrient rates and application, that's really the starting point for addressing water quality concerns with tile. And then, as we've heard a lot about today, cover crops, reduced tillage, drainage water management. That's kind of a tough practice to fit in. You know, you got to have a really flat field for that, but we do have people that have used that practice. Also, having a perennial crop in your rotation. We have some organic producers that use alfalfa in their rotation, and that is definitely a benefit for water quality. So.
Okay, and then Lee, you touched on a point in your introductory remarks about managing flow, and obviously that takes a broad effort. What are some of the things that, as an agency, the MPCA is seeing that's being applied on the landscape, either at the field level or in a coordinated level with multiple operators, that seems to be working? And is that something that's sustainable in terms of being able to balance that against the economic reality of having to farm?
Well, I think in terms of, you know, in terms of what's working, we've seen some good examples here today. I think that there's a sense that, and I touched on the comment that we're just not sort of keeping up with perhaps the ongoing drainage activities in terms of sort of the traditional approaches to water storage or storage, wetland restorations, storage basins and things like that. So there does seem to be within our agency, and we've been picking up on this from our local partners, a lot of enthusiasm for the cover cropping practices, the soil health practices that may accomplish much of the same, and they allow the land, their working land practices, the perennial practices. So I think there's at least a lot of hope there that those practices, as we've heard about them today, will really start taking off.
Well, speaking of cover crops, Pat, you mentioned that's your third crop, basically, the unspoken crop. Could you maybe talk a little bit about that? What your experience has been? Is it changed your farming operation? Is it just an additional practice that you're doing on an ethic basis, or are you seeing benefit to your overall operation?
Well, we're to make a major change in a traditional farming practice is hard for a farmer and for a family to do. We're on our third or fourth year of using cover crops, and then I realized that, well, actually I've been using cover crops my whole life. Cover crops is just a newly, maybe not a newly coined term, but a broadly adopted term for something we had done for years when we had set-aside acres, and we always planted a crop on them that we didn't harvest, and it was primarily to protect the soil for erosion and did a lot of the same things that we are now calling cover crops. So I realize that we have been doing it for a long time. What we have done most recently is we are using cereal rye planted after corn and soybean harvest. We have not gone the interseeding route where we would actually seed while the corn and soybeans are growing, but we wait until after harvest, primarily because we use a lot of manure in our system for nutrients, and we apply the manure after corn and soybean harvest as a way to, that's when the manure is applied. And so if we were to put the manure on and incorporate, any existing cover crop would likely be destroyed. So we wait until after manure is applied, and then we put the cover crop on, or we wait until after corn and soybeans are harvested, even if we don't put manure on. And we're primarily after spring growth, and I'm focused on protecting vulnerable soils in March, April, and May is the window that I'm trying to have something green growing on the soil, realizing that by planting in mid to late October, we don't get any fall growth. We're happy to have emergence. And after initially doing it the first year to, quote, prove that it didn't work, we're now in our third year of trying to figure out why it did work. And it continues to surprise us. However, it is incredibly difficult to manage. It adds a layer of complexity to spring planting season that makes it, I don't know if it's twice as hard, and Peter's nodding his head down here, but it adds a layer at one of the busiest times of the year when farmers are making extremely critical decisions that affect their profitability, certainly in the short term for that crop year. Cover crops are not easy. They are hard, and I told a farmer that I respect that I visited with earlier that I think I'll spend the balance of my farming career, which I hope is, I've got several years left, I know that I'll spend the balance of my farming career trying to figure it out, and I know that I won't have it perfected. It's a complicated thing to add to a farmer system.
Okay, Peter, are you also running cover crops? Let's just leave the mics on.
We do, and have had a lot of entomologists out looking at all the interesting insects that we attract to feed on our corn that are growing in them.
So does that, and that's getting kind of into my question then, what are the changes in your input considerations and costs running cover crops?
We have to pay a lot more attention to early season insect pests that, like the cover crops, is a great spot to lay their eggs and think they're going to have a successful reproduction in our nice lush residue. So potential for more insecticides or more GMO protection for those insects. But to echo what Pat said, we look at the results in the yield monitor and kind of wonder why on earth that worked, because it sure didn't look like it was going to work in May and June.
Okay, Pat, you want to follow up on?
If I could add one more comment about it, and I would echo everything Peter said as well. But where I'm looking for the real payoff is if we can do, as we look at our yield maps, any place where our organic matters are higher usually means we have more profitable areas of the field. So anything I can do to maintain or increase organic matters is a positive. And if cover crops give me that extra little boost to keep my organic matters increasing, and this isn't something that we measure over a 1 or 2 year period, this is something that is a long-term thing. It really affects the long-term profitability of our farms. It's easier to do that on a farm that we own than it is on rented farms. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't work as well on rented farms. It's just harder to measure and harder to control.
Okay, Lee, I'm going to ask a question that may go outside of your direct experience, but now the producers have talked about cover crops and some of the challenges. Obviously, there's some great benefit there, but one of the things that Peter talked about is we've got a new insect potential issue, and so we're applying different inputs now, and most of those are either it's a GMO input or it's chemical input, I'm assuming. what's any concerns or any thoughts from the pollution control agency's perspective on how you balance those two things? Because it seems like there's a great idea in the cover crops, but maybe the other technology is not balanced against it. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, yeah, I was thinking as the producers were commenting here, Pat and Peter, that I appreciated those reminders, because I have observed in my tenure with the agencies with that sort of, there is a tendency to look at that next shiny object, as this will finally be this will be the solution, this will be the silver bullet if we can just sort of get it going on a widespread basis across the landscape. So the comments that you made are sort of a good reminder to all of us. I think that there are probably no single silver bullets to any of these environmental, water quality, stream flow issues that we're dealing with. And then there are sort of the unintended consequences or the trade-offs, right? We know that we trade off herbicides and pesticides for tillage, and so we can be trading off one type of pollutant for another type of pollutant, in some cases sediment for a pesticide, for example. So anyway, I would just say, let's just all sort of be aware of that and remind ourselves that there's probably no silver bullet out there.
And Herman, any implications to ag water quality certification when you're introducing new practices into an ag water quality certified operation? Because obviously, again, like the producers have indicated, that input considerations change, and just wondering if that certification program allows some flexibility for the introduction of new practices.
Yeah, one thing I would add to what these guys have said is that we've also heard from some producers today that have eliminated some pesticide applications because their cover crops are providing weed control. So that one important thing with the cover crop thing is farmers learning from farmers. You see that with these soil health teams where they've kind of gathered together and helped each other learn, and that's really hard, or it's a really good thing for people that are just trying to get started. So I think that's an important part of the puzzle to making that successful, to try to give support to those people who are trying to make it work. Also, I've seen that the younger farmers, maybe anywhere from 18 to 30 years old that are farming with their dads, they're picking up on this stuff really quick. The new technology, the cover crops, the soil health stuff, they're picking it up and running with it, and I see a lot of hope, in that next generation of farmers. So, making sure that they have opportunities to come onto the farm, that's important. And as far as adding new practices through the water quality certification program, like I said before, we really try to work with the farmer and get a feel for the system that they're using currently, and then if we need to tweak some things with that system, to maybe try to get some benefits, we'll do that. If they're ready to make the jump to strip till from a mulch till, then we can help them with that. But we're not going to force anybody into making a big change that's going to affect their management on the farm.
Okay, Peter, in your introductory comments, you said Pat introduced you to tiling, and so as opposed to Pat, who said most of his land there was already infrastructure in it and stuff, I'm assuming that you must have had some areas that were either untiled or not as intensively tiled as others when you first began that practice on your farm. And so my question is, what were you targeting in your tile installations? Was it just nuisance areas? Were you looking at a broader basis of soil moisture management? What were you really trying to achieve there in the short term? And then how is that played out in the long term?
Yeah, sort of targeting two different things. First of all, on land that we may have owned for 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 generations, moving from selective tiling that ran through the low spots back in the days when it was dug by hand to pattern tiled, and then on farms that we may have purchased more recently that could have had little tile at all, just installing system drainage. And the benefits that we're targeting are sort of twofold, I would say. First of all, creating the opportunity to be timely in our agronomic activities, especially in a year like this one. And just to pick one of many benefits out as an example, this could be a year where having the field system drained allows one to side dress nitrogen, where if it isn't, it's going to be too muddy to do it. So tiling allows a person to do a timely job of implementing other best management practices. The second thing is that it's very well demonstrated that tile increases yield. And I think that we all know that plants need water to grow, but it's easy to forget from the biology textbook just how closely water is tied into the photosynthesis cycle, and the relationship between water use by the plants and production of photosynthate is a direct line because it's part of the biogeochemical cycle within the plant. So if we have a plant that is healthier because its roots are unsaturated and it's producing more yield, producing more above ground mass, that plant is using more water. And I think back to the example from an ecology textbook that I had in college. There's a picture of the amount of water that falls on a unit of land in a year. And where's that water going to go? It's either a green water flow, which is up through the plant and into the atmosphere, or it's a blue water flow, which is down into the ground and to a aquifer or a river or a lake, what have you. And it's so easy for the general public to have the image that a tile outlet is making water, and it just kind of comes out of the ground and it goes into the river system. Well, and it all comes from rain, and if the plant isn't sending it up, then it's going to go into the river, and the more the plant uses, the more yield it produces, the more water is going up, and the less flow is going out. And I think some of the modeling that David Mulla has done at the university for hydrology kind of bears that out. It's certainly counterintuitive to think that drain tile can really reduce total water flows, but it can.
It's a great comment Peter makes about you have healthy plants. They're moving water in a certain direction that may prevent it from flowing down the landscape. And again, I think we start thinking about organics in the soils, does some of that, creates capacity there. Cover crops, you got another green root in the ground that's doing that. So again, as part of the solution, do you think that there's validity in trying to balance that active drainage through tiling with creating a different direction for that water to go, and that is up through the atmosphere where it can recondense and then rain again? Just wondering from your perspective in the agency where that could get applied, maybe as a broader practice.
Yeah, so, I agree with, the idea that we probably often don't take or encourage sort of a nuanced enough discussion about water movement, and so the suggestion that Peter made, I think, is correct in terms of how tile can seemingly function in a counterintuitive way. I believe it's, we've talked about scale, we've talked about timing, so I think what Peter said is true. I think there are also situations where it would also be true that the drainage systems that we have are moving more water than the landscape would sort of move under a different condition. So somehow it seems like we need to understand that both of those things are true. It depends on things like timing and scale and soil moisture and the larger context of the drainage system, beyond the tiling, the ditching, and so forth, and sort of how do we manage those, those truths that occur, those at the same time, to sort of move things in a positive direction. I'm not sure I answered your question exactly, but yeah.
I'm just moderating a discussion. It's not really a direct question, so however you want to answer it is fine. I do want to give the audience just a heads up. After this next round of questions, I'm going to be inviting a couple questions from the audience. So if you have something that you want to ask, just be prepared for that. And I want to shift gears just a little bit and talk about technology. And I want to focus this question more toward Pat and Herman. First, Pat, I'm assuming that you're running some sort of precision ag equipment. And I'm wondering, as the technology is developing and we're getting into things like row command on your planters, and there's selective sprayers that are using some kind of infrared identification to only spray the weeds, that sort of thing, which is all out there. Whether that is changing some of the needs on your farm for both nutrient management, and then in turn how that's affecting your water management on the farm. And then to follow up on that, Herman, if you could talk about how those various technologies figure into the Ag Water Quality Certification Program, that'd be really helpful.
Sure. So the precision farming practices that we are using have allowed us to, in many cases, optimize our inputs, meaning we put the right or a preferred, what we think is right, our preferred amount of input in the right location, and not over or under apply to the ability of the equipment to do that. So precision ag has greatly increased our flexibility and our ability to deliver on that premise, on that concept. So we're not overplanting nearly as much, we're not overspraying nearly as much, and if we're not putting excess inputs into the environment, there's less available to run off. And so I think that's directly affecting water quality. I hadn't really thought until you asked the question. You kind of, not ambushed me, but you asked a question that I hadn't put much thought into before. So I don't necessarily have a direct answer as far as how has precision ag necessarily affected the drainage component of it, other than my initial thought was by having healthier crops and by not having over application of inputs, we are going to have a more healthy environment in the field. And certainly cover crops can play a role in that, and a lot of other things as well. So precision ag, cover crops, having extremely productive soils, having productive crops, it all compounds and it all snowballs into having less runoff and having less water leave our landscape and leave our field. If we have less water in a landscape leaving our field, in my opinion, we have less of a risk of having things that we want to keep on our fields and things that society doesn't want in the water to stay where they should be.
And Herman, the question is, then how does some of that ag technology, the mechanical technology or the precision ag technology, how does that figure into the water quality certification program, if it does at all?
Yeah, it does. It plays a large part in it. We do give credit for those practices. We have a lot of people that are grid sampling. They do their soil sampling on small grids within the field, and their variable rate applying their nutrients, like Pat said, so that they're getting the nutrients they need where they're needed, and they're not putting them where they're not needed. So that's a really important part. You know, if you're doing that practice, you'd be considered advanced in our assessment tool for using that. We've had people that, you know, GPS on your manure tank, you know, you can pick up right where you left off. If you got to go back to load the manure tank, you can go back and pick up right where you left off and not have any overlap. So you're not getting you're not doubling up on those nutrients in some areas, and you're making it go farther. So those are definitely important things, and it does tie into the soil health aspect of it too. So that, you know, if you're just doing a flat rate of phosphorus across the field, but you know, you might have some areas that are really high and some areas that are low, and you're fertilizing for those low areas. You might be over applying in those areas that are high, and if you have really high soil test phosphorus, your plants might not be making associations with fungi in the soil that can help make phosphorus available. So those things do come into play.
Thank you. As I promised, I'm going to solicit a question or two from the audience. Does anybody out there have a question they want to ask, either an individual panelist or maybe we can bounce it along? And they're going to bring a microphone down so you can ask the question. We can all hear it.
Yeah, you're actually going to get involved in this one, John. You brought up a water quality certified commodity earlier. Have you done much thinking about this and how you would do it? Because I think it'd be an interesting topic to discuss, especially with the panel. We have producers here, and kind of how you would do this from a consumer standpoint to kind of make it more of an attractive practice for farmers.
Matt, if I understood your question, you're asking about when you have a commodity produced on a water quality certified farm
basis. Yeah.
Does that make a difference in the marketplace?
Well, how would you do this to market this to consumers, for one, and what would the producers have to do in order to implement some of these practices that would go along with something like this on their farms?
Did you guys get that?
I had a hard time. Yeah, it's hard to hear.
Say it without the mic for a second.
Yeah, so, you know, you brought up this idea of the water quality certified commodities, which I think is a great idea. I don't want this to go to your head at all, but how would you do this from like a producer standpoint? What would you need to do in order to become a producer that's a water quality?
You're referring to my earlier question. Oh, okay. Okay. So for those of you that weren't in the first session, I asked the question of the gentleman from Land O'Lakes. You know, consumers right now are paying more for organic certified products in the grocery store. And so would it be possible to have some premium to be paid for water quality certified produced commodities? And I think Matt's asking, well, how do we get there, right? Well, I don't have an answer to that. That's why I asked the question, Matt. But clearly, you've got producers, and they're up here telling you today that they are putting extra effort into managing the water quality on their farms. They're going through the added, and I believe I would accurately describe it as pain of having cover crops and working through all that. Now, they wouldn't do that if they didn't see some long-term reward there, but they're going through that. And the real question is are we ready to say, look, if you know, what makes it worthwhile for the producer to go through that pain? And in my opinion, it's a bump in their commodity price when they go to market. So it seems to me that it is something that has to be market driven, that a lot of the commodity corporations, Land O'Lakes, CHS, Cargill, a lot of these, if they were on board with that, you could drive something in the marketplace. And I'm just going to, those are my comments on it, and I'll throw that out to the panel to see if you have any opinions on how that would work from the producer standpoint.
So I would love to be a producer and be recognized for a certain practice that we do on our farm and get a premium in the marketplace. But in general, in the work that our family has done, and my wife and siblings and our kids that are involved in our farm operation, when we look at this issue, we do not expect that we are going to get a premium, in that most of the time the consumers and the food chain that we're working with today tells us that the value that we need to extract is a value that we need to be able to recognize on the farm, either through cost savings or extra production, and that it is extremely difficult to extract any extra value from the marketplace. And most of the time, the consumers, the same consumers that will tell you that they want all these things, will also tell you that they are not willing to pay any extra for them.
Peter, or Herman, Peter, or Lee, any thoughts on that?
I would say it's hard from the commodity crop standpoint. We do have producers that are direct marketing products that will use that, they want to use that logo, the Water Quality Certified Farm. They want to use that logo on their products. There are some, grain millers in Iowa, I think they have some kind of a sustainability program where they'll pay a premium price for grain from a producer that uses certain practices. And like you said, it really goes back to the consumer and the choices that they're making. So it's going to have to come from the food companies to really get back for the commodity crops.
Yeah, I've been thinking about the exact same question in the last 3 weeks. For the last couple of years, we've been growing some hybrid rye for flour milling, and we have a field on one side of a drainage ditch that's a hybrid rye, and the other side is corn. And in the last 3 weeks, almost all the time, the tile lines out of the rye field have been dry, and simply because the water uptake of the crop is so much better synchronized with our southern Minnesota precipitation pattern than warm season crops like corn and soybeans. So no flow, no nitrates. And what a great thing if you could get General Mills or whomever interested in buying this stuff. But trying to sell rye is like pulling teeth. In corn and soybeans, there's a market all over southern Minnesota, but the U.S. is the world's largest importer of rye. We import over half of what we consume domestically, but it's almost impossible to try to get anybody in the country to buy some that's grown in the U.S. So it's really hard. And trying to bridge the gap between the producer and the board of directors of General Mills is it's a deep chasm.
Lee, any thoughts on the same topic?
Hey, John?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Before you move on, I'm curious, why is it difficult to sell your product in the United States when we're importing so much?
I don't know.
Okay. Fair statement. I'm just kind of curious. I mean,
Well, I suspect it has something to do with the momentum of the sourcing channel for the product just being so tuned in to getting it from Canada or Europe, and they're not used to getting it from anywhere else. And the local ethanol plant isn't used to getting corn from Europe or Canada, so they're used to buying it from producers all over southern Minnesota. So trying to refocus the thinking is key to the matter.
Okay, Lee. if you have something.
I'll just make a real quick comment from the standpoint of a consumer, actually, not an agency person, and that is, you know, I'm very skeptical, actually, that we'll get real far on sort of certified products. Having said that, however, I will just, you know, relate a personal story. So living in southeastern Minnesota for a long period of time and seeing firsthand sort of my perspective of the value of pasture land in southeastern Minnesota, I've sort of become a die-hard consumer whenever I can of pasture-raised dairy and meat products. So, and I think that's ingrained in me now. That doesn't necessarily transfer over to other areas of my consumer behavior. So I think it probably needs to be pretty direct to consumers, you know, and it's maybe more challenging with corn and soybeans, which are, as stated, sort of a worldwide commodity.
So I just want to follow up on that. We have a few minutes, Chuck, still? Okay. There's been some research and some publication out there about the smaller farms are becoming larger. The ownership of farms and the production of our agri commodities is less diversified now than it was even 15, 20 years ago. And part of that, at least I've read, is that the smaller farm operations are unable to internalize some of the cost of what we're talking about today. And so I'm wondering from the panel's perspective what the long-term implications are of, you know, regulation-based behavior modification for egg producers. And if you've seen that in your own operations, if you could just comment without too much pain on how that may have affected or is affecting your operation and how you've seen it change. And I'll give that initially to Pat and Peter, and then...
Since the microphone was being handed to me.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. I'm going to not directly answer the question.
That's fine.
I'm going to answer the question. My formal education background is agricultural business and agricultural economics.
Great.
So I approach a lot of things with that background in mind, and I say that because I think it's important for all of us to recognize that whoever you're talking to, if you know a little bit about their background, you know what their first instincts maybe are going to be. So my first instincts to the regulation standpoint is, no, I think the market is a lot more efficient if we can figure out a way for the market to give those influences. So when it comes to issues of water quality, that's really a hard place for me to put my head on. Well, how can the market influence that? But the story I'd like to tell is 15 or 20 years ago when I felt that I was a young farmer. And one of the big issues in Blue Earth County, which was affecting water quality, was feedlots and feedlot permitting, and a substantial change in structure that happened in our county and much of southern Minnesota as farms became larger and more confined hog operations, fewer and fewer open cattle operations, and in our county almost non-existent pasture, except maybe on some very sensitive lands that were not very suited for farming, for row crop farming. And there was a tremendous problem with agriculture not getting up to speed and doing a responsible job of manure management. And there needed to be a change in culture. And it was amazing when the price of fertilizer went up and manure suddenly became an economic resource, how the issue, while not totally disappearing, it certainly became much less of a problem, and how farmers rapidly learned how to utilize that resource. I don't necessarily want the same thing to happen in water, because I think it would be very painful for us as an industry and as a culture to absorb that. But when we can figure out ways that are non-regulatory, where people voluntarily see the benefit, and in this case there was an economic benefit for the manure that I'm referring to. If we could somehow come up with that fantasy world that I sometimes want to live in. I'll also say it's sometimes really nice to be naive about things, because it's much easier to come up with solutions. So, and I say that tongue in cheek, by the way.
Fair enough. Herman or Peter, any thoughts on that? Same topic?
Boy, no, it seems like if a person looks back at railroads and airlines and trucking in the 60s and 70s and early 80s and every other industry it's touched on, and there is at least some causal link between more regulation and consolidation. If there is more regulation, it's a lot easier for a firm that has a compliance officer or a building full of compliance officers or compliance officers and lawyers to digest that and deal with it than it is for one person who's trying to market the grain and farrow the pigs and harvest the crop and go to the kids' basketball games and all those things at once. And I'm not optimistic as far as the potential for more regulation to keep more people in the rural landscape.
Lee or Herman, any thoughts on the same topic? Otherwise, we're going to go with one last question from the audience. Well, let's take them all. That's fine. Go ahead.
I'll make
Mark.
it quick, John. I know there's a question out here in regards to the wrinkle between Swamp Buster and Wetland Conservation Act. So when a farmer has in the left hand a 1026 to go tiling, and in the right hand he can't, what sort of leadership does that farmer need to do or act on to resolve that? I mean, before he dials 1-800-RINKY-NOONAN, what can he do?
Well, that's the easy answer, or Gisselson. Jeff can do some of that work as well, I suppose, as anybody. The question for us, because we really didn't hear it, if I'm understanding Mark's question, is you have these seemingly concurrent regulatory programs. You got the Wetland Conservation Act that says you can't drain or fill a wetland that's not exempt without replacing it, and then you've got Swamp Buster, which is part of the Food Security Act, part of the farm program, that says if it's been manipulated prior to 1985 and it's either prior converted or it's a farmed wetland, you can do certain things to it. If it's prior converted, you can put as much tile in as you want. If it's farmed wetland, you can maintain the hydraulic regime that was created by the previous installation of tile. And the big difference there, Mark, is that the Wetland Conservation Act eliminated the presumption that you can maintain what you had, because it said in the ag landscape, if the wetland has reestablished itself for more than 25 years because of lack of maintenance of the tile, and you go and you reinitiate the function of that tile, you've now created a non-exempt conversion, so you got to replace that wetland. Whereas Swamp Buster would say, as long as you've continued to try to farm that piece, you haven't abandoned it from farming, even if the tile has been defunct for 25 years, you can go back in and reinitiate it, and you're still then in compliance with the farm program. So what the producer needs to do, number one, is be proactive about maintenance of your systems. Number two, document everything you have, and then look to see and understand what the difference is between the two programs, and understand that even though the 1026 came back and said you can do this without losing compliance with the farm program, you may still have other programs that you have to comply with. But it's just they're concurrent programs, but they're not identical, and that's, I think, the most difficult thing for a producer to understand, is that Swamp Buster is, we're going to give you eligibility for a program benefit in exchange for not doing something. Swamp Buster is, you can't do this unless you do something else, and they're different types of programs. So the big issue is just learning to understand the difference between the two. Yeah, I'm not letting them go.
One up there.
You guys are
Yeah, well, we're nearing the end of an interesting day, and I have a lot of questions. However, first a comment, and it ties into the, are you getting an echo here?
Just don't use the mic, just shout.
Okay. We're nearing the end of an interesting day, and I have a lot of questions. But first, a comment, if I might. Tying into the last thought that the moderator put to the panel having to do with precision agriculture. The comment is that wonderful technology, which has a tendency to become obsolete every 2 or 3 years, which I think puts another great incentive on expanding the bushels and expanding the acres over which the cost of that technology is spread. And I'd like to comment from each of the producers on that comment. Then a specific question to Mr. Ganske. You said a couple of times in conjunction with the increased river flow that we're not keeping up with draining practices. My question is the weed that you're referring to NPCA, or is the weed that you're referring to producers in agriculture?
Let's take those in reverse order. So Lee, if you could answer that first question, and then we'll have Chuck and Pat and Peter talk about the other comment.
So the we I was referring to was actually broader than either of those. We collectively as Minnesotans and Americans, I guess you could say, maybe even beyond that. So I think the same issues of not keeping pace could apply to could apply to other forms of development, other forms of land use beyond agriculture. So, yeah, I was speaking very broadly.
And then the other question had to do, I think, more with the cost benefit of that precision ag technology.
So any technology, the more we can spread that technology over a bigger and larger land base or a bigger acreage or a bigger use, the quicker the return is on that. So it's easier for a larger farmer to probably benefit from that, or a farmer with a specific need that is a bigger need. So maybe it isn't always size driven on the number of acres the farmer has, but it could be even a smaller producer who has a bigger need in a specific situation, maybe a specialty crop or a special piece of special piece of farmland that has a unique need. I don't know if that answers your question, Will.
Okay. So we have one last question. Go ahead.
I was wondering if Peter or Pat could actually give us some net numbers from pattern or system tiling. And I know you're both probably economic majors, so you really got good numbers. Because I find in farming with system or pattern tiling that the fastest way to lower my cost of production is to raise more bushels. And the number one thing since we've got yield monitors in 1990 was the return was tile. And so do you have some true numbers that you're willing to share?
Randy, from anything on our farm, and we don't really have really statistically sound side-by-side comparisons that I could give you something with a high degree of confidence. Another way to answer it is to, well, and every year since we got yield monitors, I've ranked farms or ranked fields by production from highest to lowest, and then prorated them by the averages over the years and get percent of average for every field. And the way those numbers look, certainly 10% is pretty conservative as far as yield benefit. And if you're looking at marginal cost of production, a lot of years, 10% is the difference between a 5% loss and a 5% return. So for the return side, that's my feeling. cost, and if you do it yourself for like 50 to 75 foot spacings, and it depends on what's going on in the petroleum market at the moment for pipe cost, but 500 an acre, 550, and that's if you're doing it yourself instead of on your own time for recreation.
Exactly. Some of us think it's fun to do. I have to be careful because Gary Sands is in the back of the room, and he's heard me say this answer before. So, Gary, if it's not exactly the same as my last time I answered it. So, I think that the 10% number is probably very conservative. It's pretty unique when we look at actual tile on the landscape versus the drainage system. And yet it's really difficult to measure it, because how do we measure the difference between being able to plant this year on our farm if we had adequately drained fields and we were able to plant on a 24-hour window on May 8th versus if we didn't have enough tile in the field and we ended up planting on May 20th or May 25th because of rainfall patterns and so forth. And we won't know the answer to that until the end of the year. Or we may never know the answer to that because there's a whole lot of variables that are involved. But we had a landlord, he's since passed away, who was a very conservative Scotsman. And for those of you who know Mapleton, there's quite a few conservative Scotsmen in Mapleton. And this one was particularly Scottish and particularly conservative. But his family's farm had been tiled in the 1950s. And he had a saying that he says, well, you know, you pay for that tile every 5 years whether you have it or not. So either if you don't have the tile in the ground, in 5 years you've lost enough crop that you would have paid for it, or once you put it in the ground, every 5 years you repay for it and you re-earn that benefit every time. And actually that rule of thumb, as we tried to do, and we've tried to do a more complicated economic analysis on our farm using yield assumptions and costs and so forth. Actually that 5 year, his old rule of thumb turned out to be fairly accurate. So I would say that's probably more in the 20% return category if we want to put a number on it.
Well, I want to...
What I'm encouraged, though, is that most people, even whether it's this room, other room, outside of producers, most producers can recognize that return, and that's why every fall we see a pretty active tiling activity going on just about every fall. Are we ever going to finish, putting tile in ground? Well, theoretically it's possible, but for the next couple decades, I don't see it stopping. That's for sure.
I want to thank the panel for a pretty broad-ranging discussion as we hijacked this away from just wetland rules and tiling. So thanks for your participation. Thank you all for your participation as well. Chuck, I think you have some closing comments.
Yeah. Thank you, John, too, for moderating. You did a great job. Couple closing comments. I want to thank all the speakers. I want to thank all of you for attending. Our sponsors, I think we're going to put those up on the screen, maybe. Oh, we actually have a poll everywhere. So this is just, Poll Everywhere is an app, or it's on your iPhone or cell phone. So if you just text ISGRP to 22333 and put in the numbers, we'll live show where we should do the next drainage workshop. So we've had a couple in Wilmer, a couple in Mankato. So Worthington, Wilmer, Mankato, Blue Earth, or Rome. So I've got an inside family joke about Rome, but I'm not going to say that. Thank you again to everybody for attending. I think we had a good day. We had some really great speakers. I almost lost my voice, which doesn't usually happen. We do have while you're doing the poll everywhere, Rome is up there right now. It's losing. But we have a survey. Please fill that out. And we have people in the back. If you have more questions or want to keep talking, we could stick around. So thank you again, and I hope you guys all learned a lot today. So thank you.